Hey, we are on chapter 6 of the Essential Dignities, page 75, at the bottom, titled Dispositors and Rulers. The dispositor. The ruler of a sign is similar to a king. He has dominion over everything that is found in his kingdom. The sign, it rules. This applies not only to planets situated in that sign, but also to the house cusps, parts, etc. It is said that the ruling planet disposits or rules those other planets or astrological factors. The concept of dispositor is of primary importance in the astrological interpretation. On one hand, it adds a coloring of its nature to all of the planets and elements of the horoscope that find themselves in its sign. For example, if Venus, a planet naturally agreeable and sociable, is in Capricorn, its expression will become more reserved because Saturn is its dispositor. On the other hand, the dispositor regulates the expression of a planet deposits, deposits, confirming or contradicting its characteristics. In interpretation, it indicates the motivations underlying the expression of the planet. For example, considering Venus and Capricorn once more, its expression is further modified by the conditions of Saturn in the horoscope. If Saturn is strong, the reserve it bestows upon Venus will manifest with moderation and elegance. If it is weak, it could indicate defensiveness and trepidation. In summary, the dispositor bestows upon the planet that it disposits its own state or condition in the horoscope, adding to the action of the disposited planet its own capabilities, if it is dignified, or difficulties if it's debilitated. Returning to the previous example, if Venus in Capricorn is disposited by a dignified Saturn, for example, positioned in Aquarius, the sign of its rulership, the expression of Venus will be enabled by the positive condition of Saturn. The motivations underlying the emotional expression of Venus will be sober, since Saturn is its dispositor, but the sobriety is socially acceptable and integrated such that it will not engender great problems. On the other hand, if that same Venus in Capricorn is disposited by a debilitated Saturn, for example in Cancer, the sign of its detriment, the reserve of Venus will be colored by the emotional fears and difficulties characteristic of Saturn in that position, generating defensiveness and trepidation, which are motivated by the debilitated condition which are motivated by the debilitated condition of its dispositor. In comparison, if the debility of Saturn results from being posited in Aries, the sign of its fall, the motivation it bestows upon Venus will be of a different nature. Instead of exhibiting a tint of shyness, which would be Cancer, Venus will flaunt the dry and abrupt characteristics of a Saturn in Aries. We can thus see that the nature of the difficulties varies in accordance with the type of debility of the dispositor. In some cases, the dispositor is found in the same sign of the planet that it disposits. This then becomes its own dispositor, creating a type of crossed disposition. In such a case, it is said that the two planets are in mutual disposition. For example, Venus and Capricorn will be in a mutual disposition with Saturn if Saturn is in Taurus or Libra. Signs of Venus. When this happens, the planets reinforce each other mutually, even if their natures are not particularly compatible. If we apply the system of dispositions to all the planets of a horoscope, we find that in some cases the chain of dispositors ends in one sole planet. This planet is designated the final dispositor and has a great predominance in the chart. For example, consider a horoscope with the following planetary positions: Saturn in Sagittarius, Jupiter in Cancer, Mars in Aquarius, Sun in Libra, Venus and Mercury in Virgo, Moon in Gemini. If we follow the dispositions of the planets, Mercury is the final dispositor. That is, Mars in Aquarius is disposited to Saturn, which in Sagittarius is disposited by Jupiter. Jupiter in Cancer has the moon as its dispositor, and since the moon is in Gemini, it is disposited by Mercury in Virgo. Placed in its own sign of rulership, Virgo, Mercury has no dispositor. There are two planets missing, Sun and Venus. Since the Sun is in Libra, it is disposited by Venus in Virgo. Since the Sun, by Venus in Virgo, got it. Which brings us once more to Mercury. In practice, all motivations in this horoscope would be colored by the analytic capabilities of Mercury in Virgo. Although it is usually applied to the ruler, the concept of disposition is also valid for other essential dignities: exaltation, triplicity, term, and face. The disposition will have more or less power according to the degree of the dignity that the planet has in that area of the zodiac. Exaltation can serve as the second ruler, dispositing by exaltation the planets that are located there. The triplicity rulers are used in more specialized interpretations, providing indications about the different facets of the planet. Disposition by term is applied in only very specific cases, while the disposition by face is practically ignored since it is a weak dignity. Let's see. Interpretation of dignities and abilities and planets of nativities. There's a little box I'm going to go ahead and read. One note here, not all horoscopes have a final dispositor or mutual dispositions. Some have other patterns of disposition which are not as prevalent, which will not be detailed here. And this other little box says, the planetary dignities and abilities are a system for assigning the capacity of expression of the planets. A dignified planet has its expression facilitated, and the same happens in relation to everything that the planet signifies in the horoscope. When it is in its own rulership, the planet has all its capabilities and expresses itself easily and with stability. In exaltation, it manifests with identical ease, but with greater exuberance and less stability, and tends to suffer fluctuations. When it's in its own triplicity, the planet is comfortable and has a fluid expression. In its own term, it is stable, it has a stable and secure behavior, though not as obvious as in other cases. A planet in face, decan, is relatively well, although its power is greatly limited. A debilitated planet manifests some difficulties, and these extend themselves to everything that the planet signifies in the horoscope. When in detriment, the manifestation of a planet is difficult and laborious, with a tendency to deviate from its natural inclination. In fall, one feels, above all else, the instability which translates into irregular, out of sync, and disproportionate manifestations. Another of the functions of the system of dignities is to determine the ruling planet. These rule, that is, dominate whatever planet finds itself in the signs where they hold power. For this reason, the system of dignities therefore reveals the powers game underlying the planets in the horoscope. All right, interpretation of dignities and abilities in the planets in nativities. Before explaining the system of scoring the dignities and abilities, it is important to bring to light some fundamental considerations. These concern common mistakes in the first attempts at interpreting natal charts. For example, beginners frequently state that a debilitated Mercury indicates a stupid person, or a debilitated Venus indicates someone lacking the capacity to love. This statement is based on profoundly incorrect presuppositions. The first statement presupposes that a debilitated planet does not work and that it indicates a bad person. In truth, the debilitated planet indicates difficulties in that area to which it is assigned, the house where it's positioned, and also the house that it rules. These difficulties can only be understood when a planet is contextualized into the general dynamics of the horoscope. There are other factors besides the essential dignities that can minimize this difficulty. In the life of a human being, these difficulties manifest as poorly executed or planned actions or as confrontations with people and situations that are hard to deal with. The individual, however, can learn to manage all of these situations. The same can be said about erroneous conclusions related to dignified planets. It is incorrect to consider that they indicate by themselves exceptional qualities and good people. The other incorrect presupposition is to attribute the cause of all manner of ills to a sole planet. Because of this, it is at a very minimum naive to evaluate the characteristics of a personality on the basis of a planetary position. The excessive use of the general signification of a planet also contributes to this mistake. For example, Mercury equals mind, Venus equals love, etc., without taking into account its specific signification in a particular horoscope. That was really important. So this next situation is called scoring the dignities and abilities. And I think it's going to get kind of tedious. So we're going to start a new video. We'll keep this one shorter. Okay. See you soon.